The name is Bigfoot. Whereabouts? Unknown. Throughout the ages, thousands claim to have seen it, from the forests of Northwest America to the Himalayas. Yet in all this time, no hard evidence of its existence had been found. But on October 20th, 1967, two men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, went riding in the forest near Bluff Creek in Northern California and encountered a big, hairy creature walking upright like a man. Bigfoot. They grabbed their movie camera and shot one sensational minute of footage that became known as the Patterson-Gimlin film. This film and encounter became the Bible for Bigfoot believers everywhere, and no one since has presented such compelling evidence. Experts from all over the world have studied this film frame by frame, hoping to learn more about the creature. But what people don't know is that the Patterson-Gimlin film was an absolute fake.
Ray Wallace was the kind of guy that liked to leave an impression in the Bigfoot world. I mean literally leave impressions. Hundreds of them possibly, maybe more. The Wallace legacy begins in Laird Meadow in Six Rivers National Forest in California. Wallace worked building roads for the U.S. Forest Service. It was in Laird Meadow where people discovered certain things about Wallace's roads that set them apart from others. These things were tracks, large tracks, Bigfoot tracks, he claimed, that walked along the side of the road everywhere Wallace went, in essence following him from place to place. Along with Wallace's roads, he created something much larger than that and larger than life itself, the myth of Bigfoot. He even claimed that he had a baby Bigfoot locked in a box. Here's what he wrote to the Calamity Courier, October 1st, 1969. Bigfoot used to be very tame, as I have seen him most every morning on the way to work. I would sit in my pickup and toss apples out of the window to him. He never did catch an apple, but he sure tried. Then, as he ate the apples, I would have my movie camera clipping off more footage of him. I've talked to several movie companies about selling my movies, which would last for 3 hours. The best offer I've had so far is $250,000. With Wallace, it was a family affair. This is a shot from one of his movies of his wife in a Bigfoot outfit. It's likely that Wallace made every one of the tracks seen in this footage, and perhaps a lot more that we haven't seen. After the death of Ray Wallace in 2002, the family of Wallace went public with claims that he had started the Bigfoot phenomenon with fake footprints made from a wooden foot-shaped cutout left in California sites in 1958. In addition, David Daegling stated that Wallace had a degree of involvement with the Patterson-Gimlin film and that this gave grounds for suspicion of it. The evidence for this involvement is Wallace's alleged statement, "I felt sorry for Roger Patterson. He told me that he had cancer of the lymph glands, and he was desperately broke, and he wanted to try to get something where he could have a little income."
Having moved to the Seattle area permanently in 1997, I realized Roger Patterson was a subject that I could look into. He claimed to have taken a 60-second film clip of a Bigfoot, an actual Bigfoot. Again, a subject of the paranormal, which interests me. So I realized I was only about 2.5 hours away from Mill Creek, here near Seattle, to Yakima, and I began to travel over there and dig into who was Roger Patterson, just ask the locals, who was he? And I was amazed at the information that became pouring out from these local ranchers and farmers and everyday people about this man, Roger Patterson. And the picture of Roger Patterson really was a very pleasant one as far as I was concerned. A lot of publicity come out about the film in 1967. It continued, and even today continues to be very popular as supposed evidence of Bigfoot. And no information was ever written that I could find in my research about Roger Patterson, the man, the photographer. And it's quite simple. When you're going to investigate anything, and it's an adage in journalism: who, what, when, where, why, and how are the key questions that a journalist always asks about a story. And so, when the Patterson subject came up, I decided I was going to ask those questions: who was he? Where did he live? What did he do? Why did he do it? What motivated him? How did this whole film come about? And so I approached it as an investigator would approach a crime, if you will. We have a piece of evidence, supposedly a live Bigfoot, first time ever photographed. Is it a real piece of evidence? Could it be a hoax? What about the photographer? Was he an honest man? Had he integrity? Was he truthful? What was his background? What was his belief system, and that sort of thing. So I investigated in that respect using science and the tools of journalism. You put the film aside and you take a look at Roger and you ask the question, could this guy be a hoaxer? I guess one way to find out is ask his friends and neighbors and family members. The scientists that promoted this and supported this never did that. For scientists to behave in that manner is to say they're not even scientists, because you need to go to the original source and those supporting sources for this purported evidence, and that was never done. It's amazing that in some ways you need that this story is almost like it's a small community, almost family story in itself. Bob Hieronymus, who wore the Bigfoot suit, was a childhood friend of Patty Patterson, Roger's widow, grew up with Patricia Patterson, knows her personally today. Bob Hieronymus knows Bob Gimlin, as you say, he's a neighbor, and they all lived and continue to live in a small Western Washington town. What I was shocked hearing from one of the people I talked to was, well, we've always known it's a hoax, but no one ever came to Yakima and asked us about it. And that's the failure of the Roger Patterson Bigfoot myth, which is what it is that the media ran with it, scientists ran with it, the television industry, of course, ran with it and promoted it. And for some bizarre reason, no one ever decided to dig into who Roger Patterson was and who he was surrounded with.
Well, Roger, Bob, and myself were involved in probably one of the greatest hoaxes that's ever been pulled off in history. Roger, he was a kind of a little bitty guy, you know, stout little feller. He was all right then. Him and Bob, you know, were looking over at Mount St. Helens, and we're in there for this Bigfoot thing, you know, and they'd go over there, and in fact, Roger wrote a book and a bunch of stuff, and then this Wallace thing come out down there at Bluff Creek, where he had the Caterpillar parked up there, and he made the prints, you know, and people would keep people from stealing the fuel and stuff, and so away they went, and they scouted the place out for a week or so, and they come back, and that's when I guess Roger ordered a suit from Philip Morris. Roger asked me if I would. He said, "I got this suit, this gorilla suit." He says, "and nothing's illegal." He said, "Now, would you be willing to wear this suit? I'll give you $1,000. We're going to make a movie off this, and we're going to film this and send it to the movies. People in California are going to make a whole lot of money." I said, $1,000 in '67. That's a pretty good chunk of change for a 26-year-old guy like me, you know. So I said, yeah, as long as it ain't illegal, I'll do it. So I went up there and tried the suit on. Of course, Roger had modified it, put the boobs on, the padding, and the waders, you know, and for the muscle mass and that stuff. And I tried the suit on, and he showed me how he wanted me to walk. And of course, everybody say I walked that way anyway. But I went up and down the pasture there a few times at his place up there on the South Fork. And he said, that's it. That's just exactly the way I want you to do it. They left like on a Sunday. They come and picked up one of my horses, the one Bob was riding, the big horse, and they took off, and they told me to meet him down there on Wednesday afternoon or evening at 5 o'clock at a little town called Wetchepec, the gas station. Well, I met him there, and I pulled in there. One of them, Roger, Bob, one, come running out there and says, going up the road, there's a pull-off out here. We don't want people seeing us associated together, all three of us here. So I drove on up the road and waited for them, and they finally filled their truck up and come up there. We went up the road there, about 5 miles up on Bluff Creek up there, and they had a camp set up there. And it was getting dark by then, and I drove. It takes about 12, 14 hours to drive down there from here. I was tired, and I crawled up in the back of the doghouse on the truck where they keep the saddles and the hay and stuff for horses, and had a sleeping bag and rolled out and went to sleep. And the next morning we got up, had coffee and bullshit for a while, and got a saddle of horses up, and had the suit was in a sack, a big gunny sack, and we threw that over one of the back of the horses, and I jumped on the back of Bob with my old horse, and we went up. It was about a half a mile from the camp, and unloaded the suit, and they helped me get in the suit. Naturally, they had to help me get in. It was kind of bulky, you know. And Roger said, "Now you go over here and stand this certain place." I walked over there, and he said, "When I say go, you start moving. You know, you're doing your walk." So I yelled, and I started moving, and so he was sitting on the horse, going like this with the camera. So supposedly the horse was bucking, you know, and, which is not true. Anyway, he filmed it, and as soon as they got done, we rode back to camp. Roger had an envelope already made out, stamped and everything, and he put the film out of the camera, put it in there. I took it in the car, I put it in the car, put the suit in the trunk of the car. I took the film to Eureka, California, and mailed it to Yakima. I jumped in the car, and I stayed overnight there. And the next morning I got up and come home. The next day they come back with the truck after they had gone to Willow Creek or wherever they went to announce the filming of the Bigfoot, you know. And they spread the word around and hoopla. And anyway, they come on home and they dropped my horse off at the house down the road here and took the suit. In them days you didn't lock your car or anything. They took the suit out of the trunk of the car, and that's the last I saw of the suit. Well, he had put the boobs on it, you know, for a female. He had shaved part of it, you know, with a razor, kind of make it look like the, you know, been through the brush and the hair slid off. And he redone the face on the suit that Philip sent him. He redone that with a mat, some kind of a leather. Before we left down there, Roger said when I turned to look at him, he told me when to turn, you know. And I said, well, I have a prosthesis eye, and I said I had an extra one. I said, why don't you mold that in that mask part there on the eye socket and put it at an angle. When I turn my head, I'm looking right at you with that eye. Perfect. He said, good idea. And that's the way you done it. If you notice, the eye shines. This eye on the left side is sunk back in behind the mask. A lot of people say, well, there's scientists, or so-called scientists, will tell you there's not a human being that could walk that way. Everybody in the world around here has known me said he walks that way anyway. Some of those scientists said you can see the mouth moving. The mouth never moved a fraction, you know, nothing. I kept it quiet. I promised Roger I wouldn't tell anybody. I kept it quiet for 35 years. I saw the world's greatest hoaxes, which Bob Kiviat produced on television. And I said, this time people knew the truth. Everybody around this part of the country knew it, and it was me anyway. A week after they saw the film, or the film came out. Well, that's Bob Hieronymus, that's Bob. Well, I've been called a liar, you know, a lot of times. But you can go from 2 miles down the road here to 30 miles that way and ask anybody over 50 years old who Bigfoot was, and they can tell you. Before they come and drop the horse off, I was asleep or something. My nephew and my mom were going to go to town for groceries or something. Anyway, she opened up the trunk lid to do something, and there's this suit laying in there. Well, it was a gorilla face more. She jumped back, you know. Of course, after a little bit, they got closer and saw it wasn't alive. And my nephew tried the head of it on. He ran around the house down here trying to scare everybody. And my aunt used to live right here across the road from us. She was down there, and she tried it on. But, you know, there was 8 or 9 people that saw the suit. And then you see it on television. Well, that's the same thing that was laying in the trunk of the car. You know, what about, you know, stuff on the feet? What about the shaved hair? What about, you know, the different? He said, don't worry about none of that. Roger said, you're going to be far enough away, nobody could tell the difference anyway. They say the thing is supposed to be 7, 8 foot tall. Well, I was a little over 6 foot tall. They said, well, how is somebody going to tell if you're 7 foot tall when you're clear over there, or if you're 4 foot tall? I said, you can tell, see that little tree right there? As far away as that is, a guy can say that's that big around, when it's only this big around, you know. They said they can see the mouth moving. That's Here's Bun, he saw the suit.
We were in the water hole having bears, yeah. Walker wanted us to come out and look at this, and so that's exactly what we did. We went out there, and he opened the trunk up, and sure enough, there it were. And didn't know if it was the stolen fur coat but it was the suit.
Bob was asleep. He'd got in that night, early or morning or sometime. Anyway, I was going to go get some fruit. And I was raised up the trunk to put my boxes in there. And here was the black suit laying in there.
Well, I met Bob Hieronymus, and this might sound really old-fashioned to people who don't remember this time, because it may not exist anymore, but it used to be that people could make what's called a gentleman's agreement with a handshake. It was as strong as a contract that could be enforced by a court. And Bob Hieronymus told me I made an agreement to Roger Patterson that I wouldn't tell anybody. I'll wear the suit, pay me $1,000, that's all that I want, but I won't tell anyone about it. He would tell some friends and neighbors about his experience quietly in Yakima, never seeking the limelight. And it's only when I began looking into the Patterson story, and he found out that I was there in the Yakima Valley looking into it, that he finally said, you know something, I think it's time that I just tell this. So he simply told the truth. And the reaction is, you're a liar, Bob. You're a liar. Bob Hieronymus took 2 polygraph tests. He took one by Yakima County Sheriff, and he took another one on a show called Lie Detector. It was a show that lasted perhaps 1 season, but he was given a lie detector exam by an FBI examiner, and he passed that test as well. Yeah, what I found in my investigation was the bottom of all of this was money. And in fact, Roger Patterson stated after he took this film, quote, I'm going to make $1 million. He said that. That's on record. After he took this film, scientists did look at it. It is a fairly convincing film for those who are untutored in the subject of Bigfoot. It looks like a very large, very muscular, ape-like man, swinging his arms like an ape, if you will. And so it was rather intriguing when it came out. But once you dig into who Roger Patterson was and who his connections were at the time as well, because he wasn't the only one who was looking for Bigfoot when this film was shot. There were a number of other people, big-named Bigfoot personalities, if you will, who were also looking for evidence for Bigfoot. When you start to look into his connections, who he met, where he went, what he was doing, you realize that this wasn't something that just happened by accident, but there was planning involved in it. There was preparation involved in it. It's shocking to think that scientists at that time, and there apparently are some even today, who then and even now continue to believe that this is an unknown primate. To think that this was actually looked at and evaluated by members of the Smithsonian Institute, which is one of our revered institutions in Washington, is shocking. This was presented to Life magazine for consideration to do a story on it. It was taken to a number of other scientists who evaluated in terms of its ape-like characteristics. These are anthropologists. These are experts. The Russians were involved for a period of time in looking at this film. Yeah, you have to wonder, why would people be so terribly intrigued in a film like this when their focus is solely upon 60 seconds of film strip and not upon the photographer himself?
I was sitting in my living room. It was the latter part of October, and on my television set came the picture of this Bigfoot walking through the forest, and the announcer said 2 cowboys were out in the national forest and just happened to have their camera with them and got this picture of Bigfoot. And I'm looking at him, like, holy cows, that's my gorilla suit. I had heard that he had rented a suit to use and had worked with the suit and decided that's not what he wanted to do. First of all, he wanted to make changes in it. Did not want it to look like a gorilla. He asked me when he was on the phone and he was buying the suit, he said, does it look like a real gorilla? And, no, it looks more like a Hollywood gorilla. He wanted also to be able to buy the suit so that he could make whatever changes he needed to make in it. For instance, he wanted to change it from a male to a female. I know that Roger did not know how to work with latex. However, I understood that he is a fine artist. I mean, he did some great cartoons and so forth. And he was a wood carver. So I believe that he carved whatever he was going to make and then formed it with leather. Now, what makes me, several reasons I believe that, is number one, Bob Hieronymus, who was wearing the suit, said, well, when I put on the mask, it smelled terrible. Number two, it would have been, did not understand the science of making the eyes in the mask so they matched the eyes of the person wearing the suit. When I sent the suit to Roger Patterson, I asked him, he asked me, when he called back, he said, well, you can see the eyes around the person wearing, and I said, well, there's a stick of makeup in there, dark brown makeup, and you just put that around the eyes and it covers it up. But I believe that he cut out the face, formed this other face out of leather, put it in there, and then to cover up any of the blemishes, used the extra fur that he'd asked her to send him and covered up those. And if you take a real close look at the Bigfoot that he had, there's all this fur around the thing covering up the blemishes. Here is the unique thing. Bob Hieronymus, and I didn't know this until the first time I met him, has one glass eye. That glass eye is on his right-hand side. And according to Bob, just came out of this out of the clear blue sky, he said, Roger asked me to bring along an extra eye and keep an eye out for him. And he said, and we took the mask and pushed that eye and fastened it inside the mask. Now, when he turns his head, that's what you're seeing is the eye, which would have been impossible if he hadn't done that, because you wouldn't see an eye, because, again, they could not make that leather, so it was going to come right up against the eye. And that's when he also told me, he said the mask just smelled terrible. Roger Patterson had asked me on the telephone, on his second call, well, how do you cover up the zipper line? Now, that was a pretty good sized zipper was in there. We used the same size zipper that they use for a convertible top. It's a real heavy zipper. As a matter of fact, the people that put that in there, because it took a real heavy machine, that's what they did. They sewed convertible tops. So it was formed. I said, well, here's what you do. Just get a hairbrush, and you brush back over the fur all the way up the top, and you'll cover up that zipper completely. And that's what he did. But that butt crack fooled me for a minute. I tried to figure, boy, that's a big guy. But it wasn't Bob's butt. It was a pillow. When I saw the suit on television, I thought to myself, well, give this guy a couple weeks, and he'll come out and say, "Oh, this is all hoax." It was. And then when I heard the amount of money that he was making, and the amount of money that he'd received to get the television, to sell the television rights for it, and it dawned on me, well, that's it. He's not going to step out into it. And I didn't want to say anything. Why would I want to say something? And all the costumes that we've come up with, that was a very minor thing. And it was a suit that I sold the suit, took the money, spent it, and I was on my way. Now this foot went over the top of whatever, and Patterson had several days to cut this and make it fit over the top of the wading boot. And as you step forward, you could move, it looks like the toes are moving, but the toes are not moving, they're just turning up. When I spoke to Patterson on the telephone, when he called back, he said, we'd like to build the shoulders up. So, well, this is the easiest way to do it. Now, these are shoulder pads from that period. Today's football shoulder pads are a little different than this, but this is what they were using in the 60s. And I said, go over to the high school and talk to the coach. I said, he'll have a pair of shoulder pads. He'll probably have a pair that's broken on it in somewhere, and he'll probably give them to you. Now, once you put on these shoulder pads, would you step over here, our model here, please, and put on this pair of shoulder pads. Now you see what you're doing, you see how much you're raising the shoulder here? You're adding length with the gorilla hand. But you do not put the gorilla hand all the way on. What you're doing, let's see if I get you the one for this side so it's easier to shoot. Yeah, there we are. What you do is he puts the hand just inside right here. Now it goes down to a side, and you see where it's coming? Below the knee. Where does the arm bend? Still in the center. Still in the very center.
People need to realize that it's not just Roger Patterson in this Bigfoot film that forms the core of the Bigfoot movement. Because at the time that Roger Patterson was looking for Bigfoot, there were other key players in the whole search for Bigfoot. These include John Green, a famous Canadian Bigfooter, Rene DeHinden, who is also a Canadian, Grover Krantz, a Washington State University professor, and a number of other people who are looking for Bigfoot on their own and then communicating with each other as team members and partners. They're all looking for Bigfoot. This activity was all going on, and suddenly out of the blue comes Roger Patterson. He's unemployed, used to ride in rodeos for a period of time, would take on a job which he would keep for maybe a week or two and quit because he never wanted to work for anybody. Suddenly this Roger Patterson, kind of an upstart Bigfoot hunter, enters this scene, and he starts looking for Bigfoot, and he started looking for Bigfoot at about 1964. 3 years later, suddenly he manages to take a film of Bigfoot. You know, how did that happen? The Bigfoot researchers who had been looking for Bigfoot and trying to film it had never had sufficient evidence. And yet suddenly this young ex-rodeo rider from Yakima becomes a star overnight. Immediately the other Bigfoot hunters support him. And the Bigfoot field takes off.
Doing my research into this film, it became clear to me that John Green, Rene DeHinden, Bob Titmus, and a guy from the U.S. Forest Service named Sylvester McCoy were all probably duped by both Patterson and Wallace. Having found that Green had corresponded with Titmus concerning the possibility of bringing a tracking dog into the Bluff Creek area on more than one occasion, I also obtained evidence from researcher Leroy Blevins in the form of a copy of a letter from Green to Titmus, which confirmed the dates they were there. Pilot Keith Chiazari, who has been mistaken for Bob Titmus on many occasions, flew Green, DeHinden, Dale Moffat, and Moffat's dog White Lady to the site on the 28th of August 1967 and flew them back to Canada on the 31st. During that time, Chiazari was seen many times on film walking the roads looking at the tracks while holding Rene DeHinden's shotgun. DeHinden shot the footage that has become known as the tracking dog film. The sad thing about this is that the tracks they're reviewing were almost certainly hoaxed by either Wallace or even Patterson. So Green and DeHinden became believers in the tracks and were also taken in by Patterson's film. Enter American National Enterprises, a film company, and its owner, Ron Olson. Olson was making a movie in the area at the time, and Roger Patterson was on Olson's payroll during the time when the Patterson-Gimlin film was made. And here's a picture of his cast. Do you recognize that guy up there with the long black hair? It's none other than Bob Gimlin. Do you smell a rat yet?
The Bigfoot movement has been sustained by this piece of film for 45 years. And it's amazing to me that the Bigfoot community, as it calls itself, never stopped to go back and ask the right questions. Vilma Radford actually signed a contract and loaned Roger Patterson $700 with interest for him to specifically, as he told her, to go to California and make a movie about Bigfoot.
Well, we're here today to have you talk a little bit about Roger Patterson and your encounter with him. Yeah, you've told me over and over again in many interviews all the details of what happened, but let's see if we can put this together in 5 or 10 minutes so people can understand what that encounter was all about.
So here he comes in, and he spent a number of hours with you, if I remember.
Yes.
Basically giving you a pitch. Here's the evidence. Here's photographs of big footprints. I've got a book.
I know there's a Bigfoot down in California, and I'm looking for someone to help me out, basically. Wasn't that the pitch?
Yeah, he needed money to rent the camera, is what he told us.
To rent a
now,
camera.
whether he rented that camera or not, later found out Mr. Patterson did rent a camera, but he sold it.
So we know that he signed that book and gave it to you. Secondly, we have the contract, of course, and there's his signature on the contract. Yeah. Now, this contract, if I recall, is a contract you actually typed up, I believe. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Had witnesses, too.
Right. I think there were neighbors who witnessed this.
That's right. They're both gone now. They're
right.
gone.
Right.
So are a lot of other people.
Now, Patterson came back, I think, the next day after he gave the pitch. When he left that evening, you typed up the contract. He came over in the morning, and that's where he signed the contract, and you actually gave him this money. So that's an interesting fact we need to point out. Jerry Merritt knew that you had this accident because, of course, you were friends with Jerry Merritt.
That's right.
Because he was helping to record the Velvet Illusions music. That was the band that your son was a member of, in which your husband or ex-husband helped build and promote and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we know that there's a connection between Jerry Merritt and Roger Patterson. And we know Merritt, of course, introduced Roger to you. Now, during that time in Hollywood, do you remember seeing Roger Patterson at all?
No. Never came to see us when we were there.
However, he was down there, interestingly, in mid to late October through parts of November with Al Diatley, who was his brother-in-law, and also Bob Gimlin, setting up a company called Bigfoot Enterprises. So they may not have been that far away from you, actually, there in Hollywood, would they?
No.
So you remember your husband telling you that Jack Oliphant told your husband,
"Oh yes,
you're getting took." That is by Roger Patterson.
Well, he told him right in front of me, so.
Oh, you were right there.
Yes,
okay.
I was there.
Okay, so you heard that.
Yeah.
Now, Jack Oliphant was going to sue Al Diatley, Roger Patterson, and Bob Gimlin. Do you have any idea what that lawsuit was all about that he wanted to file against those gentlemen?
Well, I think it involved. It involved something about publicity that he got from them that he had not actually got from them, but he named them. I think that's what it was about.
Okay, so perhaps Jack Oliphant, out of his own pocket, provided free publicity, perhaps buying advertising or setting up some sort of promotional event, but he never got paid for it.
Now, also, this involves a Canadian gentleman who's now dead also, who I saw several times. And he also was involved.
Now, you're talking about Rene DeHinden, is that right?
That's right.
And he came to your house, I think you told me?
That's right. He was here more than one time. He was here once with his son.
He came to the house because probably he came across some information that you had filed a lawsuit against Patterson.
That's right.
So what was the purpose of him coming?
What he was trying to do, get as many shares as he could.
DeHinden was trying to buy up from people who had some claim upon Patterson's profits, their share, so to speak, and he eventually bought from you your share.
He bought the share with $100.
Oh, $100.
All right. $100, and with the promise that the minute he made any money on the Bigfoot, he would reimburse me.
Did he ever reimburse you?
No.
Never did?
No.
It's kind of like Patterson, isn't he? Or wasn't he? Rene DeHinden.
Well, I look at it this way. Money does strange things to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is no human being alive that can name where the Bigfoot is and go right back there and found him. If he was, we'd have heard about it by now.
He was selling shares, if you will, in this scheme of his, this operation of his. So she wasn't the only one probably loaning him money. But she loaned her a considerable sum, and she waited and she waited to be repaid. He was going to have a film. Now, she learned eventually he did have a film, this famous 60-second film. Yet no money was paid back to her. But we know from talking to other principals in this scheme that the film was soon thereafter, after October, hitting the roads and being promoted and shown in theaters all across the United States. We have to question whether the film was even shot on October the 20th. That's the importance of knowing about Kodachrome film at that time. The film supposedly was, the story goes, mailed to Yakima, to the U.S. Postal Service, to Al Diatley, another player in this entire story. He has no memory as to receiving the film. He hasn't denied that he had it processed, that he himself had it processed, but he has no memory whatsoever of where he would have sent it. And I find that pretty amazing, because he is the man who 2 days after the film was shot, supposedly on October 20th, on October 22nd, he was showing it on a projector in the basement of his home in Yakima with Roger Patterson in attendance, and along with John Green and Renee DeHenden and some other famous Bigfoot people.
I get a lot of bad emails from people. Everything that I find is not like I just look at it. I have other people look at it as well and give me their input on what they see. If you watch the film, and if you even look at the stills, you'll see there's actually a scene that runs from the buttocks all the way up through the hip and around to the front. When the creature walks, you can see part where the leg muscle is, where they claim it was a herniated muscle. You can see it all just presses up together, like your pants be folded together. When the arm comes back, you'll see this whole section up here folds together and gives you a smaller outline of an arm. Okay, you can even see the outlines of the shoulder pads that they have underneath there. When the creature walks, there's no separation in the buttocks. Buttocks sways from left to right, left to right, left to right when the feet's motions. But when the right leg comes down, the left buttock should go up. It should have a different separation, and there's really no separation in it, even though they claim there's separation in it. But when you actually watch the film, you'll see it just moves left to right, left to right, left to right. That's it. There's no separation whatsoever.
Well, it's interesting, the role of John Green and Renee DeHenden specifically in all of this, because within 2 days of the film being shot, if it were shot on October 20th, and we don't believe that anymore, they end up in Yakima, Washington. They're in the basement of Diatley's home, who financed Roger's expeditions, as he called them. They're there looking at this film. And you're going, well, did Roger know John Green? And you go, well, yeah, he did. Roger Patterson visited John Green in 1964 in order to, in order to borrow news stories and information from John Green to put into his book that Patterson ultimately wrote, called Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? So Green knew who he was. And Patterson made the contact to get something out of Green. Now, Renee DeHenden knew John Green. They lived close by in Canada, and they both were interested in reports of Bigfoot in the Bluff Creek area, where the film was shot, and often travel there together or separately looking into the subject. In that area, suddenly Roger Patterson shows up. He found in 1964, now I don't know if it was before he met John Green or after, but Roger Patterson said he found a Bigfoot print in Bluff Creek and he made a cast of it. So here is Roger Patterson in communication with John Green and Renee DeHenden. Within months of this film being shot, suddenly John Green wants to get a copy of it. Renee DeHenden wants to get a copy of it, and they paid money to have it. I think they were motivated to make money out of it and to promote their own projects, Bigfoot projects. You know, John Green was a well-known Bigfoot writer at that time and soon thereafter, and sold a lot of books and made a lot of money, my understanding is. Renee DeHenden saw that there was money in that film, and he wanted to use it to promote himself as well in his efforts. In fact, he took it all the way to Russia to have it analyzed, to establish its scientific veracity and truthfulness. I think pure and simple, John Green and Renee DeHenden made certain that they associated themselves with the film in order to promote their own works, meaning books. lectures, whatever they could produce to make money. Money-making operation. Aldi Atlee, Roger's brother-in-law, told me that he found, frankly, Roger Patterson a nuisance. Because Roger Patterson, being broke, would always come up to his rich brother-in-law. You know, Aldi Atlee owned Superior Asphalt Company and took a small operation and made it into a multi-million-dollar concern and made his wealth primarily that way. But he knew Roger Patterson was a nuisance and would give him handouts. But he also saw that Roger Patterson was onto something potentially big, Bigfoot. So Aldi Atlee helped finance Roger Patterson, certainly on his trip to Northern California. We have that stated many times over. Because Aldi Atlee saw money as well, just like John Green and Renee DeHenden. And he made a lot of money, Aldi Atlee. He told me that he took off time from his company for an entire winter to go on the road with a film, helped establish theater venues for it, accompanied Roger Patterson in the field, and in fact made so much money at one particular theater in Oregon that Aldi Atlee and Roger Patterson had a trash can full of money. Yeah, Patty Patterson is an interesting equation, if you will, or component of the equation of the Patterson film. Very little is known about her publicly. It's always Roger Patterson, Bigfoot hunter, famous adventurer. But you know, he was married. He had children. He has children. 2 sons and a daughter. And Patterson died, left the film to his wife, but very little's been written about her. People tend to not even care to write about her. Why don't they know about her role in this, if she had any role at all? Now, according to Bob Hieronymus put on this Bigfoot suit on Roger Patterson's property, and he remembers looking at the kitchen window that faced the backyard of the property, and there was Patty Patterson looking out the window at him, Bob Hieronymus, in the Bigfoot suit, along with Bob Gimlin present, and Roger Patterson. Or certainly Roger Patterson was there. It'd be nice to interview Patty Patterson. Was she there? What did she see? Does she deny the fact that she saw Bob Hieronymus in a Bigfoot suit? She's never denied it. She doesn't give interviews like Bob Gimlin. Why is that? Patty Patterson makes money off the Bigfoot film, pure and simple. Who knows how much money she's made since Roger Patterson died. It's been used in countless documentaries. Let's say that she charges $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 a shot for exclusive rights to the film for a particular use. Let's say she's done that 20 times. Has she made hundreds of thousands, $500,000, $1 million off of this film? And yet, she never gives interviews as well. Just like Bob Gimlin, she's in the background. She quietly lives in Yakima, and she's waiting for the phone call to come in from an interested television producer or other interested concern who wants to buy rights to that film. All the people I called who knew of Roger Patterson as a neighbor, watched what he did in the Yakima Valley, all consistently told me that Roger Patterson was a shady, kind of no-good guy. Okay? He took advantage of people, he stole from them, he used them, he dumped them, he went on. But when you bring up that subject to the founding fathers of Bigfoot, oh, that's all irrelevant. The honesty and integrity of the photographer of Bigfoot has absolutely nothing to do with this film. These people, the founding fathers, if you will, of Bigfoot, and this also includes a Gimlin and a Patty Patterson, protect the film as much as they do because it provides them income, it provides them publicity, it provides them a certain degree of notoriety, and if they don't have that Bigfoot film as their preeminent piece of evidence, they're nothing. The Bigfoot subject for these founding fathers was a money-making operation from the beginning. They're all either dying or have died or are very old people. And they've made a lot of money during their adult lifetime. I did everything I could that I could with Bob Gimlin, because Bob Gimlin would not really give me a personal, formal, face-to-face interview. I did get a comment from him. But Bob Gimlin is a sort of a smooth-talking gentleman. He's often described as being just a nice man, okay? A perfect witness to a Bigfoot in which the center of the Bigfoot film experience is really Roger Patterson. Bob Gimlin was there to say, yeah, I saw it too. I was there. And he's maintained his statement that way for 45 years. But he never gives an interview to anyone who has some hard questions to ask him about the film and his involvement in it. He'll give all the interviews he wants to Bigfoot believers, those people who believe and worship the film, but he won't talk to skeptics, even neutral skeptics. You know, a reporter that knows nothing about the subject and simply wants to meet him and talk to him. He will not do that. He'll slam the door in your face. Here is a copy of a warrant of arrest for Roger Patterson. Roger Patterson rented a camera from Shepard's camera shop in Yakima and never returned it. Camera shop contacted him constantly asking for the camera back. He never provided it. So, county sheriff went out and arrested him. Now, I don't know if they put him in handcuffs, but he was arraigned in court and there was a hearing about this theft. He apparently had the camera for some time. You would think, though, after he shot the film, he would have brought it back. Here we have a very curious drawing. It portrays a Bigfoot, which interestingly has breasts, similar to what is observable on Roger Patterson's Bigfoot that shot on film in Bluff Creek. Roger Patterson had access to this photograph, to this drawing, because Patterson visited John Green in Canada in 1964. John Green was collecting many stories. In fact, he had collected the William Rose story. And so I think we can assume fairly that Roger Patterson knew the story of William Roe, had access to this drawing, or certainly had access to the written story about a female Bigfoot. This is a photograph of the actual truck that was used by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. Bob Gimlin owned this when they drove down to Bluff Creek, California, and spent several days down there looking for Bigfoot. What's interesting about this photograph is that it does show a compartment up here. And I had never seen this truck or a photograph of this truck when I interviewed Bob Hieronymus. But Bob Hieronymus told me that he remembers sleeping that first night he arrived in Bluff Creek, and he had met Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin at a campsite. He remembers sleeping in this little wooden alcove here at on the front of the truck.
So now you've seen the film, touted to be evidence of an unknown primate. You've met Ray Wallace, the man responsible for founding the myth, Roger Patterson, who took advantage of the myth, and Bob Gimlin, the all but silent partner. You've seen the tracks Patterson collected and their resemblance to known fakes. You've seen testimony from Philip Morris and Bob Hieronymus, and from those who saw the suit after the fact. You've met the investigative reporter and a duped investor in Patterson's scheme. All we can do is show you the evidence and encourage you to see the facts as we present them. But there are some of you who will never let go of the belief that this film was real, despite seeing its falsehoods displayed before your eyes. That is, of course, your decision. But remember, belief in something doesn't make it real.
There's nothing in Bob Hieronymus' background or his family background that indicates at all that he has any sort of shady characteristics. Contrast that with Roger Patterson, and he had all the shady characteristics in the world. He absolutely refused to work for a living. Now, part of that I can understand in that he had cancer. He had it in different phases of development and remission. So it might have been difficult to work. Yet he told one of his brothers, Les Patterson, I am never going to work for anybody. And he said that after he worked for a day or two at an auto parts warehouse. He said, that's it. I'm not working for anybody. So Roger Patterson did not want to work for a living in any conventional standard sense that we understand. Punching the clock from 9 to 5, working 40 hours plus a week at a job. He didn't want to do it. He refused to do it. He was supported by his wife's, his father-in-law, Willis Mondor, was provided a house free by Willis Mondor that he could live in because Willis Mondor knew that his son-in-law didn't have a job and wasn't going to work for a living. Friends of the Pattersons would often bring them groceries because they had no money. Patterson published a book called Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? We have evidence that he committed mail fraud. This is from the lips of Renee DeHinden, no longer with us, but Renee DeHinden had a copy of the Patterson film. And I interviewed Renee DeHinden, and he said to me he committed mail fraud. People would send in checks to buy his book, Patterson's book. Patterson simply would cash the checks and never send them a book. So he committed mail fraud. Checks bounced constantly. There was nothing in the bank, and yet he and his wife were writing checks. They had no money. Roger Patterson would often use telephones of his neighbors to make long-distance phone calls. I suppose he was trying to find someone to help promote his film, and would rack up hundreds of dollars of bills for phone calls and never pay them. Never pay his neighbor back. There's countless other examples in my book, The Making of Bigfoot, that shows that Roger Patterson was a chronically, willfully, unemployed individual who did not want to make an honest living, who lived off others, who cheated others, and who lied and was also arrested for stealing the very camera that he used to film the Bigfoot in Northern California. Now contrast that with Bob Hieronymus, like I mentioned earlier. It's like night and day. You have one man who's honest and hardworking and a responsible citizen. You have another one that's irresponsible, and he certainly didn't want to work for a living, but he wanted to make, as he said, $1 million. It's interesting that, when I talked to John Green, Renee DeHinden, Peter Byrne, they immediately were defensive. You're out for no good, Greg. There's no need to write about Roger Patterson. It's all about the film. So what if Roger Patterson stole and lied and schemed? It's all about the film. It's all about the film. There has to be a Bigfoot in the film. Why did these people protect Roger Patterson's character, in essence? No one. If you see, Patterson was a con man. He was a thief. He was a liar. These are indisputable facts.
Jerry brought Patterson here and introduced us, and then he took off, and we talked to Patterson quite extensively. But what he told us was not the truth. He presented me a book, or us, I should say, a book of Bigfoot and the footprints and all that sort of thing, pictures. We discussed it, and then we loaned him the money that he wanted, which he said he had to have for a camera. He told me, or told us, that he was going to get Bigfoot. Now, I have a question to ask in the middle of this. How did he know Bigfoot was there and nobody else knew it was there? How come in all these years they've never found another Bigfoot down there? How come with all our technology, with the planes and everything else that we can spot things with, have we not located Bigfoot? Because he wasn't real.
We're gonna make fake Bigfoot prints. Just run down this middle of the snow here,
Like
where it's all clear.
Like jump?
Yeah, jump.
Go.
Yeah, when you're ready. Yeah. Now let's see the tracks that you started with. Man, that's a pretty good long stride you got there, man. There's another one. Let's see what the stride is. Go from the tip of the toes.
This one?
Yeah, just the tip of the toes. Right there. Okay, to the heel. That's a 64-inch stride, man. Yeah, but see, look at my stride next to yours. Okay. Well, look at your stride right there, man. So yeah, it's easy to make Bigfoot prints. Start right here and go it this way on the slope side to see how you do it. See what your stride will be then.
What?
Yeah, start right here, run down that way, down the hillside.
On the hillside?
Yeah, right, just straight down this, right here. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, here's one print. Here's another print. Now let's see how your stride is here. Hold it right here on this toe here. That time you went 67. Jeez, oh Pete.
I got long legs.